Welcome to South South News. I'm Bill Miller. What is Fiji, a Pacific island state, doing to participate in the International Seabed Authority, to provide peacekeepers for UN peacekeeping missions, and to confront climate change and especially rising sea levels? My guest today is going to bring us up to date on all three of these particular activities. His Excellency, Ambassador Peter Thomson, is the Fijian permanent representative to the United Nations representing his country. Ambassador Thomson is the current president of the Assembly of the International Seabed Authority and has been elected as one of the vice presidents of the UN General Assembly's 66th session that runs from mid-September of 2011 through the beginning of September of 2012. Ambassador Thomson, welcome to South South News.
Thank you very much, Bill.
I appreciate you being with me. We're going to get into these heady issues in just a minute, but one very important one. Let's talk a little bit about Fiji. Where is it located? How many people do you have? And what are some of your major industries?
Major industries first. Tourism is our big one. We have great beaches and great hospitality from the people of Fiji. It's a very popular place for holiday makers. Sugar cane, we make rum from sugar cane. We export a lot of sugar. And industries based on our natural materials, forests and marine industries, fishing and so on. That's what our economy is based on. Where are we? We're in the South Pacific Ocean. If you think of Hawaii being 18 degrees north of the equator, we're 18 degrees south of the equator, and we're right on the 180 degrees line, so that the day starts in Fiji. First newspaper in the world is published in Fiji each day.
Very good. So you're Hawaii's counterpart, so to speak.
You could put it that way, yeah.
18 degrees.
Yeah, they say aloha, we say bula.
Very good. Well, it's a beautiful area of the world. I've not been to Fiji, but someday I hope to be there. But I know many of our viewers have and certainly will want to go. Let's move into some of these issues. I mentioned the International Seabed Authority, but really going back a little bit, it's the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea Treaty, called UNCLOS, that acronym. What exactly was the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea Treaty? Why did the UN adopt it? What does it do?
It's basically the convention that gives the rights and the obligations for nations towards the oceans. Historically, we had the high seas, which were sort of delimited by the length of a cannonball shot. But in the 20th century, people came to realize that you've got to think about pollution of the ocean, you've got to think about the access to the minerals on the seabed, that you have to think about safeguarding the fish stocks and managing the fish stocks of the ocean. So it was necessary for us, for humanity, to come up with some rules about who would manage and how we would manage the ocean beyond the national jurisdictions.
The idea is then you bring the countries of the world together and you set up the rules on how to responsibly manage the oceans, to extract the minerals and that type of thing, not overfish the area, clean up the garbage, make sure it's not polluted.
Correct.
And so that's what we're focusing on.
Good housekeeping.
Good housekeeping, seal of approval.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, now within that, the International Seabed Authority, what exactly does it do? The
Seabed Authority does come out of UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It's one of the provisions therein. It came into being as the authority to control seabed matters. Now, why do you need that? Basically because there are a lot of very valuable minerals down there. Secondly, it covers a large part of the Earth's surface, the high seas beyond national jurisdictions. So for us to have orderly access to the seabed, we needed an authority, and that's what the International Seabed Authority does. And of course it has very weighty matters to consider, such as the health of the ocean. So it's looking at the environmental aspects of seabed, and at the same time it is looking at how we're going to go about extracting minerals from the seabed. So very weighty responsibilities.
And of course, the seas are so important, the oceans are so important to life all around the globe, and perhaps sometimes we take them for granted. We think, well, 75% of the Earth, I guess, is covered with water, and we don't have to worry too much about it, but we really do, because we're polluting it, we're overfishing. We see that the fish supplies are diminishing. We see that there are many other problems that countries go to war over
Correct.
boundaries
Yes.
that are in the seas.
Yeah, well, there are two very important principles that the International Seabed Authority espouses. One is the precautionary approach, that everything we're doing is being very carefully quantified and explored and examined before any actions are taken. And the second is that this area of the planet is for the common heritage of mankind, so that the Seabed Authority is administering it on behalf of all mankind.
Now, one potential problem we see coming is with climate change. It's already here. We see the melting of the Arctic area. And of course, this is sort of no man's land up there, so to speak. But as that ice melts, there are a lot of minerals that are trapped under the ice. And we see that there are all different types of things like oil and what have you. And of course, various countries such as the United States, Canada, Russia, Denmark, perhaps others have indicated that they should have rights to those. Will your Seabed Authority be involved in this, or where would some issue like that be taken? Would that go to the International Court of Justice, or how would that be dealt with? Because you want it to be dealt with peacefully and not
Sure.
in a warlike way.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those resources you're talking about fall within the 200-mile exclusive economic zones that countries have. So where that is the case, it's not a matter for the authority. Where it falls within the areas of the seabed beyond, yes, it is a matter for the authority and will be dealt with just like any other application to the authority. To date, the authority has issued only exploratory licenses. It hasn't issued any mining licenses. That's mainly for the reason that we don't yet have mining regulations. We have put in place the exploration regulations for polymetallic sulfides, for polymetallic nodules, which are the minerals on the seabed, but we don't have the mining regulations yet. That work is starting on that now. But it is expected that within 5 years, yes, countries will be applying for rights to mine on the seabed. Maybe not 5 years, but we foresee the day in the near future when they will be. So the authority is preparing itself for that.
Now, some countries, well, the United States comes to mind. It seems the majority of the businesses in the United States, the majority of the members of Congress and the Senate, which is where this treaty would be adopted in the United States, are in favor of. The United States Coast Guard is pushing it. The Navy is pushing it to be involved in this. A lot of businesses, mineral extractors are pushing it, yet a small handful of senators in the Senate aren't pushing it, and they blocked it basically. But why is it important for everybody to participate in this, be it the United States or all the countries of the world?
Well, I think the answer to that would be because this area is for the common benefit of mankind. It's something that we should all share in. And to share in it properly, obviously it has to be administered properly. We are happy to see that the United States, as it comes down to our annual meetings in Jamaica, which is where the authority is based, as observers. But we're very hopeful that soon that they will ratify. They have signed, but they have not yet ratified the convention. As soon as they ratify it, they'll become full members, and we're very hopeful that they will do so soon.
And as we're talking about the oceans, we're talking about climate change, melting glaciers, melting Arctic, and that type of thing. It all ties into this issue of security. And they were brought together at the United Nations Security Council not too long ago. Give us a little bit of a background on that. What happened at the Security Council in July, it was 2011, July 20th of 2011, something like that?
Yes, it was 20th of July, quite correct. Germany was the president of the Security Council for the month, and it was their initiative that brought it to the Security Council for debate. They worked very closely with us. We have an organization called the PSIDS, which is the Pacific Small Island Developing States, and we worked very closely with Germany in preparation for that debate. We were disappointed with the way a lot of countries tried to stop the debate from happening. They felt that all of that talk about climate change should be done through the UNFCCC process, you know, the Copenhagen, Cancun,
right, the framework on the Convention on Climate Change.
Correct.
Yes.
And we're very committed to that process as well, but we also believe that climate change is now of such a threat that it is also something the Security Council should deal with because it will have security implications for mankind. And that was why we pushed very hard for it to be there, and we all made, all of the PCIDS countries made statements, including the President of Nauru, who came all the way to New York to make a presidential statement to the Security Council.
Right. I remember Ambassador Susan Rice was very vocal about that too, was very supportive of linking these two, because as we see it develop, as the oceans rise, the seas rise, as islands may be wiped out, totally wiped out, and you know much more about this, you're from that area of the world where many of them are just sand dunes and they could be covered very easily. What happens to those people? And maybe that's my question, what happens to a country, God forbid, say the Maldives were to be covered, or some of the others, Tuvalu or whatever? How would you deal with that?
Well, yes, just going back to Susan Rice, we were very heartened by her words at the Security Council debate. Yeah, she was very forthright in noting the seriousness of it. Look, the seriousness can be summarized if you look at the 4 atoll republics of the world: the Maldives, the Marshall Islands in the Pacific, the Republic of Kiribati, Tuvalu. These are all countries which are atolls. There is no high ground. And we're told by scientists that sea levels are going to rise over the next 90 years by 1.5 meters. This is the end for these countries, countries with 4,000-year-old cultures. Where are their people going to go? What are the implications for sovereignty of countries which exist today if they're going to be like Atlantis under the water in 90 years' time? These are very difficult questions for humanity, but they must be asked because we're going to need a solution to them.
And of course, there are countries that are beyond that. You take a country like Bangladesh, a large part of it could be underwater. You take a state like Florida in the United States, most of it will be underwater.
Yes, and I think if you look at a country like Bangladesh, where 1.5 meter rise might displace up to 40 million people, where do 40 million people go? So to me, it's just very straightforward that there is security implications of climate change, and I can't understand why people didn't want us to debate it. You also, I think, have to look at the food security aspect, because these great delta areas which are under threat, Bangladesh, an obvious one, Mississippi Delta would be another one you could look at, Mekong. These are great food-producing areas, and if they're going to go under seawater, food security will be deeply affected.
And of course, this all ties into climate change, and we've seen that there's such a large reservoir of data produced by the scientists from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has come up with, I think, 5 reports or something like that, 4 or 5. And you see that the evidence is overwhelming. And we can look out at times and see how storms are becoming more severe, hurricanes in the Caribbean. You probably have experienced this with typhoons or some type of cyclones in the Pacific. Has Fiji been hit by these cyclones, or have you noticed this, that the climate is changing dramatically in your area of the world?
Look, as far as hurricanes are concerned, it can be said with some scientific certainty that we are going to get stronger and more frequent storms. Why? Because the hurricanes come from the hot water temperatures of the equatorial zones, and when the water temperatures up there are hotter, there's going to be more cyclones. We've noticed that now over the years, and with the forecast heating of the world's oceans, yeah, it's just it follows on as night follows day that we're going to get more hurricanes, and that is obviously a tremendously destructive force when it comes through and hits a small island country. I mean, a tornado does terrible damage, or a hurricane does terrible damage to the United States, but you're big enough to be able to absorb that. If you get a hurricane going over the top of somewhere like Tuvalu, it wipes out the whole economy, basically.
It certainly does. Well, before we run out of time, we're going to go from one hot spot to another, talk about peacekeeping. I mentioned that in the introduction, and we see that the United Nations set up its peacekeeping operations in 1948 with a peacekeeping team observer mission in Palestine, and today they've had over, I guess, 65 missions, and there are about 124,000 peacekeepers operating around the world in various very dangerous areas of the world. But Fiji, you have a population of 900 900,000, but you've been a very major player in peacekeeping. Tell us about your involvement in peacekeeping with the United Nations.
Right. Well, in the late 70s, it became obvious to, well, not obvious, but it became part of our foreign policy that if we wanted to be good global citizens at the United Nations, that we needed to look at all our rights and responsibilities, and we, in our own resources, always had a very good military tradition in Fiji, so we realized that we could contribute peacekeepers as part of our obligations to the international community. So we began with a battalion in UNIFIL in Lebanon in the early 80s, and we remained there for 24 years on the Israel-Lebanon border. And then from Jimmy Carter's days as President of the United States, when they set up the multinational force in the Sinai on the Egypt-Israel border, we put a battalion down there, and they've been there ever since, actually. They're still there, down there now. We've got a battalion today in Iraq that's been there since 2004 that guards the UN presence in Iraq. There's over 250 of our men and women, and they are the sole blue helmets in Iraq doing that job. We're also in Liberia with police peacekeepers. We're in Darfur. We're in southern Sudan, and going into RBA, we expect. We're also in Timor-Leste. So yes, we have a big experience in peacekeeping, and I'm very proud as ambassador of Fiji to let people know about that record.
Now, you're going to be visiting a mission soon, but you've visited other peacekeeping operations. What are some of the most memorable experiences you've had as you visited with peacekeepers, either on site or maybe just talking with them after, or perhaps in your own country, whatever the case might be?
Well, I'll let you know when I get back from Liberia, where I'm going next week. I'll get my yellow fever jab tomorrow morning for that.
Good luck.
But I was in Baghdad recently visiting our peacekeepers there, and yes, it gives you a great sense of pride. First of all, to see the UN personnel that are working there for the betterment of the Iraqi people, and then secondly, to see our Fijian soldiers, men and women, protecting them in their daily work, a tremendous source of pride.
I can well imagine, and certainly it goes to show that a country, all countries have a role to play. You're a small population with 900,000 people, but you play a critical role. You play it with the International Seabed Authority, you're confronting climate change, you're involved in peacekeeping, so you're doing activities that are extremely important not only to Fijians but also to people in other parts of the world and people around the world. And of course, all 193 countries at the United Nations have a role to play in dealing with this. But Ambassador Peter Thomson, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bill.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on South South News.